Your brain is lying to you right now. It's telling you that the hard thing, that project, that workout, that difficult conversation, is going to be torture from start to finish. It's painting a picture of endless suffering and overwhelming effort that makes you want to scroll through your phone instead. But here's what neuroscience has discovered: your brain is spectacularly bad at predicting how you'll actually feel once you start. The resistance you feel isn't about the task itself. It's about the transition from comfort to discomfort, from stillness to movement, from safety to uncertainty. And that transition? It only lasts about 2 minutes. That's it. 2 minutes of genuine discomfort, and then something remarkable happens. Your prefrontal cortex kicks in, dopamine starts flowing, and suddenly the thing you were dreading becomes manageable, sometimes even enjoyable. The secret isn't building massive willpower or waiting for motivation to strike like lightning. The secret is understanding that your brain's initial resistance is a liar, and you only need to tolerate that lie for 120 seconds before everything changes. Think about the last time you finally started that task you'd been avoiding for days. Remember how you felt in the 5 minutes before you began? The heavy dread, the mental negotiations, the desperate search for any excuse to delay just a little longer. Your brain was screaming that this was going to be terrible, that you weren't ready, that maybe tomorrow would be better. Now remember what happened 5 minutes after you started. The dread vanished, didn't it? You found your rhythm. The task that seemed mountainous from a distance suddenly became a series of manageable steps. You might have even experienced flow state, that magical zone where time disappears and work feels like play. This pattern repeats itself in every area of human achievement, yet we forget it every single time. Olympic athletes don't feel like training on cold mornings. Successful entrepreneurs don't feel like making difficult decisions. Award-winning writers don't feel like facing the blank page. But they've all learned the same fundamental truth: feelings are terrible predictors of outcomes, and starting is 90% of the battle. The 2-minute rule leverages this neurological quirk with ruthless efficiency. When you're facing a hard task, you don't commit to finishing it. You don't even commit to working on it for an hour. You commit to just 2 minutes. 2 minutes of writing. 2 minutes of exercise. 2 minutes of that phone call you've been dreading. Your brain can't marshal its full resistance against such a small commitment. It's like trying to build a fortress to defend against a butterfly. The resistance crumbles because it has nothing substantial to push against. But here's the beautiful trick: once you've started, once you've broken through that initial barrier, your brain's chemistry shifts. The anterior cingulate cortex, which was screaming danger signals, quiets down. The basal ganglia, which controls habits and automated behavior, starts engaging. Dopamine, that crucial neurotransmitter that makes you feel good about progress, begins trickling into your system. And suddenly, stopping feels harder than continuing. You've hijacked your own neurology, using your brain's momentum bias against its resistance bias. This isn't motivational fluff or positive thinking nonsense. This is documented neuroscience. Dr. Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist at Stanford, has extensively researched what he calls the friction point, that moment of maximum resistance before beginning a task. His studies show that the neurochemical state of anticipating difficulty is actually more stressful than the difficulty itself. Your body floods with cortisol, your amygdala lights up with threat signals, and your entire nervous system prepares for something terrible. But when you actually begin the task, especially if you frame it as temporary and limited, those stress signals diminish rapidly. The anticipation was worse than the reality. Always. Understanding this gap between anticipated pain and actual experience is like finding a cheat code for human behavior. You stop trusting your feelings about starting and start trusting the process instead. You become someone who acts despite feeling, not because of feeling, and that single shift separates people who achieve extraordinary things from people who dream about them. The most successful people in any field have internalized this truth so deeply it's become automatic. They don't wait to feel like doing hard things. They've trained themselves to recognize the resistance as a signal to begin, not a reason to delay. When a Navy SEAL feels the dread of cold water before a training dive, that feeling becomes a trigger to move, not to hesitate. When a surgeon feels anxiety before a complex operation, that sensation reminds them to focus, not to doubt. When an entrepreneur feels fear before a crucial pitch, that emotion becomes fuel rather than an obstacle. You can develop this same neural pathway. Every time you push through those first 2 minutes of resistance, you're strengthening the connection between discomfort and action. You're teaching your brain that the scary thing leads to good outcomes, that resistance is temporary, and that starting is always easier than continuing to avoid. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic. The hard things become your default response to challenge, not because you've somehow manufactured superhuman willpower, but because you've tricked your brain into craving the rewards that only come from pushing through discomfort. If this chapter just changed how you think about procrastination, smash that like button and subscribe for the next 4 chapters where we dive even deeper into brain hacking strategies. Comment below, what's the one hard thing you've been avoiding? Let's hold each other accountable. Chapter 2 reveals the 5-second countdown technique that elite performers use to bypass resistance completely. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. Hashtag Chapter 2, the countdown that kills hesitation. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go. In those 5 seconds, you can override years of conditioning, decades of avoidance patterns, and a lifetime of choosing comfort over growth. Mel Robbins stumbled onto this technique during the darkest period of her life, when she couldn't even get out of bed to face another day of mounting bills and crushing depression. She counted backwards from 5 and launched herself out of bed before her brain could argue. That simple act saved her life and eventually became a global phenomenon because it exploits a fundamental glitch in human neurology. Your brain can't process complex reasoning during a countdown. The prefrontal cortex, that sophisticated part of your brain responsible for planning, analyzing, and talking you out of things, needs time to build its case against action. When you impose a 5-second deadline, you don't give it that time. You activate the primal, action-oriented parts of your brain instead, the parts that kept your ancestors alive when a split-second decision meant the difference between eating and being eaten. This isn't about motivation or inspiration. This is about activation energy, and understanding that hesitation is a choice you're making dozens of times every day without realizing it. The neuroscience behind the 5-second rule is devastatingly simple. When you have an impulse to act on a goal, you have approximately 5 seconds before your brain begins generating reasons not to act. This window exists because your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that thinks it's protecting you, needs a few seconds to construct rational-sounding objections. You're too tired right now. You should do more research first. This probably isn't the best time. These aren't facts, they're fear wearing a disguise of logic. But in those first 5 seconds after the impulse strikes, before the objections form, you exist in a state of pure possibility. Your intentions are clear, your energy is available, and the path to action is unobstructed. The countdown interrupts the brain's pattern-matching system that would normally compare your current situation to every past failure and disappointment. Instead of giving your brain time to rifle through its extensive library of reasons why you can't, shouldn't, or won't, you're forcing it to focus on a simple numerical sequence. And here's the crucial part, the countdown must be backwards. Forward counting allows your brain to anticipate the end and prepare its resistance. Backward counting creates a launch sequence, a sense of urgency and inevitability that propels you into motion. NASA didn't choose countdown sequences randomly when launching rockets into space. They understood that counting down creates psychological momentum, that each descending number increases tension and focus until action becomes inevitable. You can borrow this same principle for launching yourself into hard tasks. When you feel the impulse to start that workout, to make that call, to write that email, to have that conversation, you begin counting, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At 1, you move. Not eventually. Not after you finish this one thing. Not after you feel more ready. You move immediately, physically, decisively. Stand up. Open the laptop. Pick up the phone. Put on your shoes. The action doesn't have to be complete, it just has to be initiated. Because once you're in motion, Newton's first law applies to human behavior just as it does to physics: objects in motion tend to stay in motion. The hardest part of any task is the transition from stationary to moving, and the 5-second rule makes the transition automatic rather than optional. You're not building willpower here. You're eliminating the decision point where willpower usually fails. Elite military units train this principle into their soldiers with ruthless efficiency. In high-stress combat situations, hesitation kills. Soldiers are conditioned to act within specific time windows, to trust their training more than their fear, to move before their conscious mind can paralyze them with worst-case scenarios. The same principle applies in emergency medicine, where doctors and paramedics must make life-or-death decisions in seconds. They can't afford analysis paralysis or decision fatigue. They count, they move, they act, and they process the emotional aftermath later. You might think your daily challenges don't compare to combat or emergency rooms, and you're right, they're less intense. Which means if this technique works in life-or-death situations, it's almost comically effective for everyday procrastination. The resistance you feel before starting a workout or a work project is the same neurological mechanism soldiers face before entering danger. Your brain doesn't distinguish between physical threats and psychological discomfort. It produces the same cortisol spike, the same fight-or-flight response, the same desperate search for escape routes. The countdown disrupts this pattern before it can fully form, giving you access to action before fear fully loads into your system. The beauty of the 5-second rule is its portability and universality. You don't need special equipment, a specific environment, or ideal circumstances. You can deploy it anywhere, anytime, for anything. Morning alarm goes off. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, feet on the floor. Staring at a blank document. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hands on keyboard. Standing at the gym entrance. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, through the door. Each successful deployment strengthens the neural pathway between counting and action, making the next one easier. You're building what neuroscientists call an action habit, an automated response that bypasses conscious deliberation. After consistent practice, you'll notice something remarkable: the countdown itself becomes unnecessary. Your brain learns that hesitation is no longer part of your behavioral repertoire. The impulse to act becomes directly connected to action itself, with no delay, no negotiation, no internal debate. This is how Olympic athletes train themselves to perform under pressure, how successful entrepreneurs learn to make fast decisions, and how ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things. They've collapsed the time between intention and action down to nothing, eliminating the space where doubt and fear typically breed. You can develop this same capacity, not over years, but over days and weeks, simply by refusing to let more than 5 seconds pass between knowing what you should do and actually doing it. Did you just realize how many opportunities you've lost in those 5 seconds of hesitation? Hit that like button if this technique is going to change your game. Subscribe because Chapter 3 reveals the identity shift that makes hard things feel like who you are, not just what you do. Drop a comment: what's one thing you're going to use the 5-second rule on today? I want to hear your commitment. Smash that notification bell. Chapter 3 drops soon and it's the most powerful technique yet. You don't have a motivation problem. You have an identity problem. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you believe you are, and right now, you're casting votes for someone who avoids difficulty, who chooses comfort, who waits for the perfect moment that never arrives. But here's the revolutionary truth that cognitive behavioral psychology has proven again and again: you don't need to change who you are to change what you do. You need to change what you do to change who you are. Identity follows action, not the other way around. The person who goes to the gym isn't motivated to exercise, they're someone who exercises, and motivation is irrelevant to their identity. The person who writes every day isn't waiting for inspiration, they're a writer, and writers write regardless of how they feel. When you shift from, "I'm trying to be disciplined," to, "I am disciplined," something profound happens in your neural architecture. Your brain stops treating hard tasks as foreign invaders and starts treating them as expressions of who you fundamentally are. This isn't positive thinking or affirmation nonsense. This is identity-based behavior change, and it's the most powerful tool in the human psychology toolkit. James Clear popularized this concept in Atomic Habits, but the principle runs much deeper than habit formation. Psychologists have studied identity and behavior for decades, consistently finding that people will act in ways that confirm their self-concept even when those actions contradict their stated goals. If you see yourself as someone who's just not a morning person, you'll find a way to sleep through alarms no matter how many you set. If you identify as not good with money, you'll sabotage every budget you create. If you believe you're not athletic, you'll quit every fitness program within weeks. These aren't character flaws or genetic destinies, they're identity prisons you've locked yourself inside. The key to escaping isn't to change your circumstances or wait for a personality transplant. The key is to start taking actions that contradict your current identity and maintain them long enough for your self-concept to update. Every time you do something that doesn't match your self-image, you create cognitive dissonance, a psychological tension that your brain desperately wants to resolve. You can resolve it by dismissing the action as a fluke, or you can resolve it by updating your identity. The more consistent the contradictory actions, the more pressure builds for an identity shift. Smoker and letting their actions reinforce that identity until it becomes unshakable. Here's how you weaponize this principle: stop setting outcome goals and start adopting identity goals. Don't say, "I want to lose 20 pounds, that's an outcome that requires a future version of yourself who somehow magically has more willpower than you do now." Instead, say, "I am someone who moves their body every day." Don't say, "I want to write a book," that's an overwhelming project that your brain will sabotage with perfectionism and procrastination. Instead, say, "I am a writer who shows up to the page daily." The difference seems subtle, but it's neurologically massive. Outcome goals put success in the future, always out of reach, always requiring more effort. Identity goals put success in the present, achievable in the next 5 minutes, validated by single actions. When you adopt an identity, every small action becomes evidence of who you are rather than a grueling step toward who you want to become. You're not trying to become disciplined through acts of discipline, you're demonstrating your discipline through actions that align with who you already are. This shift eliminates the exhausting mental negotiation that precedes every hard task because you're not deciding whether to do the thing. You're simply being who you are. The practical application is ruthlessly simple: choose the identity, then cast votes for it through small, consistent actions. Want to become someone who does hard things without hesitation? Start narrating your actions in identity terms. I am someone who keeps commitments to myself. I am someone who doesn't negotiate with discomfort. I am someone who does what needs to be done, regardless of how I feel. Every time you follow through on a hard task, you're providing evidence for this identity. Your brain is constantly collecting data about who you are, and it forms its conclusions based on the preponderance of evidence, not the intentions you never act on. One workout doesn't make you an athlete, but it's one vote for that identity. One early morning doesn't make you a morning person, but it's evidence that contradicts the identity you're trying to shed. Stack enough votes, accumulate enough evidence, and your brain has no choice but to update its assessment of who you are. This is how people quit smoking after decades of failed attempts, not by white-knuckling through cravings, but by adopting the identity of a non-smoker and letting their actions reinforce that identity until it becomes unshakable. The most powerful question you can ask yourself before any task isn't, "Do I feel like doing this?" It's, "What would the person I want to become do right now?" This question bypasses your emotional state entirely and connects you directly to your aspirational identity. The person you want to become, disciplined, successful, healthy, productive, doesn't skip workouts because they're tired. They don't avoid difficult conversations because they're uncomfortable. They don't procrastinate on important projects because they're not inspired. They do the hard thing because that's what people like them do. That's their identity, and identity is destiny. Every time you act from this aspirational identity rather than your current feelings, you're building the neural pathways that will eventually make that identity automatic. You're teaching your brain that people like me do hard things, and your brain, desperate for consistency and pattern recognition, will start generating behaviors that match that belief. This is how transformation happens, not through dramatic personality overhauls or life-changing epiphanies, but through accumulated evidence that you're already the person you want to become. You just need to keep voting for that identity until it becomes undeniable, unshakable, and automatic. If this identity shift just clicked for you, destroy that like button and subscribe. We're halfway through this brain-hacking journey and Chapter 4 reveals the pain reframing technique that makes discomfort addictive instead of avoidable. Comment below, what's your new identity statement? Mine is, I am someone who finishes what I start. What's yours? Hit that notification bell because Chapter 4 is going to fundamentally change your relationship with difficulty. Don't miss it. Pain is information, not punishment. Discomfort is feedback, not failure. The burning in your muscles during a workout isn't your body breaking down, it's your body adapting, growing stronger, becoming more capable. The anxiety before a difficult conversation isn't a warning to retreat, it's evidence that you're about to do something that matters, something that requires courage. The frustration of learning a new skill isn't proof you're not talented, it's the sensation of your brain forming new neural connections, literally reshaping itself to accommodate new capabilities. But somewhere along the way, you learn to interpret all discomfort as dangerous, all pain as something to avoid at any cost. This interpretation is destroying your potential. The most successful people in any domain have learned to reframe discomfort entirely, to see it not as an obstacle but as confirmation they're on the right path. They've trained themselves to feel the burn and lean into it, to notice the resistance and push harder, to experience the fear and move forward anyway. This isn't masochism or toxic positivity. This is understanding that growth only happens at the edge of your comfort zone, and discomfort is simply your body's way of telling you you've arrived at that edge. David Goggins calls it callousing the mind. Wim Hof calls it getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Elite athletes call it embracing the suck. The terminology changes, but the principle remains constant. You can train yourself to crave the sensations you currently avoid. Your brain's interpretation of physical and psychological discomfort isn't fixed, it's learned, which means it can be unlearned and relearned. When you first started drinking coffee, it probably tasted bitter and unpleasant. Now you might crave that exact same bitterness because you've associated it with energy, focus, and morning ritual. The taste didn't change, your interpretation did. The same neurological rewiring is possible with discomfort. Right now, when you feel challenged, your brain releases stress hormones and generates avoidance behaviors. But you can train it to release dopamine instead, to generate approach behaviors, to interpret struggle as exciting rather than threatening. This happens through repeated exposure combined with conscious reframing. Every time you lean into discomfort instead of away from it, you're teaching your brain that this sensation precedes good outcomes, progress, achievement, growth, transformation. Do this enough times, and your brain starts anticipating those good outcomes whenever discomfort appears, flooding your system with dopamine instead of cortisol. The reframing starts with language, because language shapes perception and perception shapes reality. Stop saying, I have to work out, and start saying, I get to challenge myself physically today. Stop thinking, this is so hard, and start thinking, this is making me stronger. Stop telling yourself, I'm stressed, and start recognizing, I'm activated and ready to perform. These aren't empty affirmations, they're deliberate reinterpretations that change your neurochemical response to challenging situations. Stanford psychologist Alia Crum has extensively researched how mindset affects physical performance and stress response. In one study, she took two groups experiencing identical physical stress and gave them different interpretations of what they were feeling. One group was told their stress response was debilitating and harmful. The other was told their stress response was enhancing and helpful, that increased heart rate meant more oxygen to the brain, that sweaty palms meant heightened alertness, that nervous energy meant their body was preparing them for peak performance. The second group performed significantly better and reported enjoying the experience more, despite experiencing identical physiological stress. The difference wasn't in what they felt, but in what they believed about what they felt. You can apply this same principle to every hard thing you face. Here's your practical protocol for rewiring discomfort. When you feel resistance, pause for 3 seconds and label the sensation neutrally. Not, "This is terrible," but "I'm experiencing activation." Not, "I can't do this," but "My body is preparing for challenge." Then, and this is crucial, smile. Physically force your face into a smile, even if it feels fake. Neuroscience has proven that facial expressions send feedback to the brain about emotional state, and smiling triggers the release of endorphins and serotonin regardless of whether the smile is genuine. You're hacking your own nervous system, using your body to trick your brain into a positive interpretation of uncomfortable sensations. Next, lean into the discomfort slightly. If your muscles are burning during exercise, hold the position for 5 more seconds. If you're anxious before a presentation, take 1 step closer to the stage instead of hanging back. If you're frustrated with a difficult problem, focus more intently instead of taking a break. These small escalations teach your brain that discomfort isn't dangerous, that you can tolerate more than you think, and that pushing through leads to positive outcomes. Over time, your threshold for discomfort expands dramatically because you're not actually building tolerance, you're changing the fundamental interpretation. The ultimate goal is to reach a state where discomfort becomes your preferred operating zone, where easy feels boring and challenge feels like home. This is the state that separates exceptional performers from average ones in every field. When a Navy SEAL goes through Hell Week, enduring 5.5 days with almost no sleep and constant physical torture, they're not surviving through superhuman genetics. They're surviving because they've trained themselves to interpret suffering as temporary and meaningful, to find satisfaction in pushing past what they believed possible. When an entrepreneur risks everything on a venture that might fail, they're not immune to fear. They've learned to interpret fear as excitement, to reframe potential failure as valuable data. When an artist creates despite years of rejection, they're not numb to disappointment, they've learned to see each rejection as evidence they're taking risks that matter. You can develop this same relationship with discomfort. Start today. Find something uncomfortable and deliberately choose it. Feel the sensation fully, without judgment or avoidance. Notice that you survive it. Notice that often, you even grow from it. Stack these experiences until your brain's default response to challenge shifts from, "How can I avoid this?" to, "What can I learn from this?" That shift is the difference between living reactively and living intentionally, between being controlled by your comfort zone and choosing your own boundaries. If this chapter just made discomfort look different to you, smash that like button and subscribe. We're almost at the finish line. Chapter 5 reveals how to stack all these techniques into an unstoppable system. Comment below, what's one uncomfortable thing you're going to choose today? Let's reframe discomfort together. Hit that notification bell because the final chapter is the most powerful one yet. You don't want to miss how this all comes together. You now have 4 powerful weapons in your arsenal: the 2-minute rule that breaks through initial resistance, the 5-second countdown that eliminates hesitation, the identity shift that makes hard things feel natural, and the discomfort reframe that turns pain into fuel. Individually, each technique is transformative. Combined into a systematic approach, they become unstoppable. But here's what most people get wrong about implementing multiple strategies: they try to use all of them all the time, creating a complicated mental protocol that adds friction instead of removing it. The real power comes from understanding which tool to deploy in which situation, and eventually integrating them so seamlessly that you're not consciously thinking about technique at all, you're just someone who does hard things automatically. This final chapter is about building that integrated system, about creating a framework so robust that motivation becomes irrelevant, willpower becomes unnecessary, and doing difficult things becomes as natural as breathing. This is where everything converges into practical mastery, where psychology becomes lifestyle, where knowledge becomes power. Start by mapping your personal resistance patterns. Not all hard things trigger the same avoidance response, and understanding your specific patterns lets you deploy the right countermeasure. Some people struggle most with initiation, they know what to do but can't get started. For them, the 5-second countdown becomes the primary weapon, used multiple times daily until starting becomes automatic. Other people struggle with consistency, they start strong but fade after a few days or weeks. For them, identity-based framing becomes crucial, because "people like me don't quit" is more powerful than any external motivator. Still others struggle with intensity, they'll do easy versions of hard things but avoid genuine challenge. For them, discomfort reframing is the game changer, teaching them to seek out the burn rather than avoid it. Spend 1 week simply observing yourself without judgment. When do you procrastinate? What excuses does your brain generate? What time of day is your resistance highest? Which specific tasks trigger the most avoidance? This data is gold because it tells you exactly where to intervene. Once you know your patterns, you can design countermeasures specifically calibrated to your neurology rather than following generic advice that may not address your actual obstacles. Next, create implementation intentions for your highest value hard things. An implementation intention is a specific if-then plan that removes decision-making from the equation. Instead of, "I should work out more," you create, "When my alarm goes off at 6 a.m., I will count down from 5 and put my feet on the floor. When my feet hit the floor, I will immediately put on my workout clothes. When my workout clothes are on, I will go directly to the gym without checking my phone." Notice the specificity. Notice the chaining of behaviors. Notice the elimination of decision points. You're not relying on morning motivation or willpower, you're following a predetermined sequence that was decided by your rational mind during a moment of clarity, not by your groggy, resistance-prone brain at 6 a.m. Implementation intentions have been proven in hundreds of studies to dramatically increase follow-through rates, sometimes doubling or tripling the likelihood of goal completion. The reason is simple: they automate the decision-making process that typically exhausts willpower. You're not choosing to work out every morning, you decided once to work out every morning, and now you're simply executing the protocol. Stack your techniques into these implementation protocols, creating behavioral chains that make the hard thing inevitable. The maintenance phase is where most people fail, so this is where your system needs the most reinforcement. After the initial excitement fades, after the novelty wears off, you'll hit what marathon runners call the wall, that period where progress feels invisible and effort feels maximal. This is when the identity piece becomes absolutely critical. You can't rely on seeing results to keep you motivated because results lag behind effort by weeks or months. What keeps you going during the gap is identity. I am someone who shows up regardless of results. I am someone who does what I committed to do. I am someone who keeps promises to myself. These aren't aspirational statements anymore, they're descriptions of reality proven by accumulated evidence. Every day you show up is another vote for that identity. Every time you do the hard thing when you don't feel like it, you're strengthening the neural pathway that makes that identity unshakable. Eventually, you reach a tipping point where not doing the hard thing feels wrong, feels inconsistent with who you are, creates more discomfort than doing it. This is the goal: to make your hard things so integrated into your identity that skipping them would require more willpower than executing them. Finally, build in regular escalation because your comfort zone expands as you conquer challenges. What felt impossibly hard 6 months ago now feels routine, and if you don't continuously raise the bar, you'll plateau. This doesn't mean constantly suffering, it means continuously growing. When the 5 a.m. wake-up becomes easy, you move it to 4:30 a.m. When running 3 miles becomes comfortable, you add hills or speed work. When having difficult conversations becomes natural, you tackle even more vulnerable topics. This principle of progressive overload applies to every domain, not just fitness. Your brain adapts to whatever you consistently demand of it, which means you can continually expand your capacity for hard things simply by consistently attempting things slightly beyond your current ability. The key word is slightly. You're not trying to leap from beginner to expert overnight. You're adding 5% more challenge every few weeks, trusting that small incremental increases compound into massive capability over time. In 1 year of 5% weekly increases, you'll be capable of things that seem impossible right now. In 5 years, you'll be operating at a level that your current self can't even conceptualize. This is how ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things, not through dramatic transformations or superhuman willpower, but through systematic, incremental expansion of their tolerance for difficulty. You now have the complete system. The only question remaining is, who do you want to become, and what hard things will you do today to cast that first vote? You made it to the end. If this series just gave you a complete operating system for doing hard things, destroy that like button and subscribe for more life-changing content. Comment below with your biggest takeaway and the one hard thing you're committing to starting today. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. You might just change their life. Check out the playlist for more brain hacking strategies, and remember, you're not building willpower, you're building a better brain. Now stop watching videos and go do the hard thing. I'll see you in the next one.